On this episode of Forgotten Streets, we will be covering the life of a prominent figure in Chinese history whose story has been lost to time. His name was Situ Meitang. Situ Meitang was a Chinese underworld and political figure who was very powerful and influential in America's Chinatown. He was best known for being a Tong leader and for being the head of the Chinese Freemasons in America, which had an enormous impact on the overseas Chinese community. Throughout his legendary life, he was not only associated with the biggest in Chinatown, he was also close to several famous world leaders like FDR and Mao Zedong. In this video, we will discuss the full life story of Situ Meitang and how he came to be a Chinatown legend. Situ Meitang was born in 1868 to a poor farming family in Kaiping County, Guangdong. As a young boy, he worked on a farm and studied to be a carpenter. He learned how to fight at an early age to defend himself and his family, but at the age of 14, he heard about the United States from other villagers and saw an opportunity to get out of poverty. He begged his mother to get him a ticket on a steamship that was bound for America. His mother granted his wish and he boarded the ship alone as a young teen. He arrived in San Francisco in 1882. He wrote about how Chinese immigrants were bullied by the native-born white Americans when they arrived, and how this forced him to stay closer to his community. He started off working as a cook and had several other tough jobs, the likes of which Chinese immigrants often took in order to make ends meet. But still, young Situ was not making enough money and he didn't have any family support. So, at the age of 17, he decided he needed help. He joined the Ghee Kung Tong, one of the Chinese societies, or Tongs, that helped Chinese immigrants with employment and protection. The Ghee Kung Tong, who are also known as Hongmen or Chinese Freemasons, is one of the oldest Chinese American organizations and shares a lineage with all triads and secret societies, both legal and illegal. All Chinese secret societies allegedly descend from the original society called the Ti Andahui, or the Heaven and Earth Society, which was a Han Chinese group loyal to the Ming Dynasty, with the goal of overthrowing the Qing Dynasty ruled by Manchu foreigners. The Ghee Kung Tong's alternate name, the Chinese Freemasons, leads us to a confusing discussion about the connection to Freemasonry. Some people say that the Chinese Freemasons have no real connection to Western Freemasonry and never shared any mutual goals. These people believe that the Ghee Kung Tong simply used the name to legitimize themselves and not be seen as a foreign syndicate by whites. Conversely, others believe that the two groups are one and the same, since the Ghee Kung Tong actually uses Masonic symbols, clothing, and rituals. Other evidence to support this claim is that there were actual prominent white Freemasons who were instrumental in the Ghee Kung Tong, like Major John Jeffrey, who was a close friend of Mark Twain and member of the Chinese Masons in San Francisco. Some conspiracy theorists even go so far as to say that the Chinese Masons have been instrumental in revolutions just like Western Masons and are part of the same world plan of global domination. This, however, can never be proven. The Ghee Kung Tong were first established in San Francisco around the 1870s, but eventually spread to all other Chinese diaspora communities in the United States and even spread to other countries such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It was also the first Tong established in New York's Chinatown, in which all original residents were sworn members. The organization was at times considered an organized crime group or highbinder society because it was associated with the other Tongs that engaged in crime, like the Hop Sing and Sui Sing Tong. But the truth is that the Ghee Kung Tong itself was set up as a benevolent association meant to protect Chinese immigrants from racism and other Chinese gangsters who tried to bully them. Although not an official criminal organization, the Ghee Kung Tong had members who were gangsters and who were sometimes involved in gambling and violence. However, the other Tongs were more frequently involved in the underworld and could be labeled as crime syndicates. When Situ Meitang became a sworn brother of the Ghee Kung Tong, he took an oath to never reveal the secrets of the Brotherhood on pain of death. The organization made him more connected and financially stable, so he didn't have to work as a cook anymore. But just a few years later, he ran into some trouble, bad enough that he would need the help of his new brothers. A local restaurant that Situ used to hang out at was frequently harassed by a white gang, and one day they came when Situ happened to be inside. After 3 white men were bothering the staff and customers, Situ confronted one of the guys and knocked him to the ground. After beating him mercilessly, the man died, and the other men scattered. He was eventually arrested for murder and sentenced to death. The Ghee Kung Tong raised money for him and got the best white lawyers to defend Situ to claim self-defense. His sentence was eventually reduced, and Situ was released from prison after serving only 10 months. After release, Situ Meitang became a famous name in Chinatown for his bravery, and he moved up the ranks of the Ghee Kung Tong society. He then relocated to the East Coast and became based in Boston's Chinatown. Following his imprisonment, he realized that his people had to do more to physically defend themselves from threats. This led him and other gangster-minded Ghee Kung Tong members to create a more militant organization called the Leong Tong. The first Leong was established in New York in the 1890s, and the second in Boston in 1904, and from there on they spread throughout the country. Situ Meitang himself was head of the Boston sect and number 1 in charge of the Leong's national committee. At the time, the Hip Sing Tong dominated criminal activity in Chinatowns in the East Coast, such as drug sales, extortion, and prostitution. They were also no strangers to assault and even murders. The Leong's goal was to counteract the influence of the Hip Song Tong and help those who were bullied by Hip Song gangsters. Although they were still a benevolent organization, they eventually turned into a full-blown criminal organization as well. The Leongs became heavily involved in prostitution, gambling, extortion, protection rackets, drug smuggling, and weapon smuggling. The Leong's resistance to the Hip Sings created an eternal rivalry which lasted for over 100 years. And the two groups battled frequently on the streets, which made up a large portion of America's Tong Wars and left Chinatown streets bloody for years. In New York, the Leongs and their leader Tom Lee warred with the Hip Sings and their leader Mock Duck for many years in the early 1900s. Under Situ Meitang's guidance in Boston, the Leongs and one of their leaders, Charlie Boston, warred with the Hip Sings and their leader, Wary Charles, in many Tong Wars. The criminal activity in Tong Wars brought Meitang, the Leong, and the Ghee Kung Tong under constant pressure from law enforcement, which prompted him to hire a well-connected white American lawyer around 1908. This lawyer was none other than future President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as FDR. The two became close friends for many years to come. Meitang's relationship with FDR is largely unknown to the public but was very influential in political and social affairs. Many believe that this friendship was the reason that President Roosevelt lifted the Chinese Exclusion Act in 1943. It's also worth noting that FDR was a prominent Freemason, and it's possible that there was a connection between the white and Chinese Masons. Now approaching the 1910s, political unrest was brewing in Situ's homeland. Chinese revolutionary Sun Yat-sen was plotting the overthrow of China's Qing dynasty monarchy in order to replace it with a republic. His ideas were very dangerous, which got him expelled from China. While in Japan, he formed a secret revolutionary society called the Tongmenghui. He then reached out to all Chinese secret societies, both criminal and legitimate, to form a massive network of anti-Qing resistance. One of the most important factors to Sun's revolution was the overseas Chinese community. He reached out to Chinese Masons in Honolulu, Hawaii, and became a sworn member of the Ghee Kung Tong around 1904. Sun then reached out to the Ghee Kung Tong in New York and gained full support from Situ Meitang and his organizations. Sun stayed at Meitang's house for weeks, and Meitang provided Sun with his own personal security. Meitang gave the brave revolutionary his support in many ways and raised over 150,000 yuan for the cause. Sun Yat-sen and the revolutionaries were successful in 1911, and the First Republic of China was formed. Meitang would then stay in close connection with the Republic of China, Sun Yat-sen, and future leader Chiang Kai-shek for the years to come. In said years to come, Situ Meitang stayed active in Chinatown and in both his organizations, the Ghee Kung Tong and the Leong. The Leong was spreading to other cities like Chicago and expanded to thousands of members nationwide. They were dominating criminal activity in their territories and had every business, both legitimate and illegitimate, paying them. The group went through many bloody tongue wars and other turbulent times. Seligman, in his famous book Tong Wars, says that after dozens of people got killed in the Hip Sing and Leong wars in the 1920s, that Situ Meitang had to play Godfather and interfere to stop the bloodshed with a peace treaty. It's unclear how directly involved Situ remained with crime, but there is no doubt that he sanctioned it and profited from it. However, his reputation remained relatively clean because of his good relationship with the Democrats and the US government. By the 1930s and at the beginning of FDR's presidency, the Leong became aligned with the Democratic Party. This was most likely due to Meitang's relationship with FDR, who was a lifelong Democrat. It was also believed that the Leongs were getting special treatment from the newspaper and police regarding criminal activity like extortion and gambling. Some even believe that Meitang's connection to the government kept him out of prison and out of the newspapers for all those years. This theory could possibly explain why he doesn't have any criminal record after his release from prison, for a call to FDR would have easily gotten him out of any legal trouble. The Leong was becoming more influential in legitimate business and politics and leaving the Tong War activities in the past. Now with serious political connects, the Leong needed to clean up their image. Under Meitang's orders, the Leong was officially renamed the Leong Merchants Association in 1932, in order to look more like a legitimate organization and not some crime syndicate. By this time, the Ghee Kung Tong had over 500 chapters around the globe with tens of thousands of members. Situ Meitang, who was in his 70s, became the #1 in charge of all Ghee Kung Tongs in the Americas, making him one of the most powerful overseas Chinese. But another disaster was about to unfold. In 1931, the Japanese invaded Manchuria, the northeast region of China, which was the beginning of over a decade of Japanese occupation in China. The invasion resulted in the death and displacement of millions of Chinese citizens. Although Situ Meitang had issues with the Republic of China's ruling party, the KMT, and its leader Chiang Kai-shek, he decided that they needed all the support they could get to fight the Japanese. Meitang and the Ghee Kung Tong established fundraisers in their lodges and helped raise more than $3 million for the Chinese war effort. Again, Meitang reconnected with FDR, who was a Chiang supporter, and served as a middleman to help both of his nations. In 1941, in the midst of World War II, Meitang was invited to China by KMT officials and offered a position in the government. In Hong Kong, Meitang led a group of gangsters responsible for suppressing and eliminating any triad members who were sympathetic to the Japanese. However, Meitang was arrested by the Japanese after their occupation of Hong Kong and was offered to work with them. He bravely refused and was kept on house arrest. But fortunately for Meitang, an underground Chinese communist organization aided him in escaping the occupied territory. He relocated to Chongqing and stayed with the famous mob boss Du Yusheng from the Green Gang. Situ Meitang eventually returned to the Americas and continued to raise money and support the Chinese in the war effort. After the surrender of the Japanese at the end of World War II, the Chinese Civil War between the nationalists and the communists kicked off. Situ Meitang was now faced with a dilemma. He was disappointed with the dictatorship of Chiang Kai-shek and the instability of the Republic. He was also on good relations with the communists, and he believed their promises of representation. Therefore, he was leaning towards the CCP. But supporting the communists wouldn't be easy considering all the Chinese societies in America were pro-KMT and anti-communist. He started a nationwide Ghee Kung Tong radio broadcast in which he promoted communist propaganda. He tried to bring the Chinese Masons and other Chinese societies in America on board with the CCP, but almost all of them rejected his overtures. Meitang eventually relocated to mainland China in 1949. He continued promoting communist propaganda through radio and newspaper to the Americas, but he was eventually labeled a traitor. He was expelled from the Leong and Ghee Kung Tong and forced to stay in China for the remainder of his life. His support for the communists ruined his prestige and reputation with the Chinese American community, who was still overwhelmingly pro-nationalist and pro-Chiang Kai-shek. This left the question of why would he risk everything he built in America just to support a particular government? Some suspected that he wasn't actually a communist and that he believed the communists would win the Chinese Civil War over the nationalists, so it was a simple case of joining the winning side. If this was really his thought process, his predictions came true, because Mao Zedong and the communists won the Chinese Civil War and established the People's Republic of China in 1949. Meitang became close friends with Mao and was present at the founding ceremony of the People's Republic in Tiananmen Square. Meitang continued his life in China and became very influential in the nation amongst powerful military leaders and officials. Now, some say that he disagreed internally with communist policies after realizing they broke so many promises, but that he never spoke out of fear. Situ Meitang died in 1955 in Beijing at the age of 89 of a brain hemorrhage. His funeral had every powerful person in China in attendance, including Mao himself. He left behind 3 sons. With the death of Situ Meitang, the Ghee Kung Tong's influence in America declined, but the other Tongs like the Hip Sing and the Leong continued to be influential in Chinatowns across the country, and even up until the present day. Ghee Kung Tong and Chinese Freemasons still exist in America and still have a voice in Chinatown. The lines between community organization and criminal society have been blurry even up until recent times, like Raymond Chow's association with the Ghee Kung Tong in San Francisco or Herbert Liu's Freemason gang in New York City in the 90s. However, the Chinese Freemasons in America today are not involved with criminal activity. Also, the Chinese triads in China, Hong Kong, and Macau still have association with Chinese Masons, as shown in the example of how Broken Toothed Koi of the 14K established the World Hongmen History and Culture Association with other gangsters. Situ Meitang had a long, eventful life and is still held in high regard by many in China and overseas. Numerous statues and memorials have been erected in his honor all over the world, and in 2018 an exhibit in Beijing was dedicated to his life for the 150th anniversary of his birth. His combination of underworld and mainstream ties make him a mysterious figure that's hard to label, as is the case for many Chinese gangsters. And although his political affiliations will cause his legacy to be disputed for years to come, one cannot deny the influence Situ Meitang had in Chinatown and his impact on the Chinese community as a whole. We hope that with this biography that we will help prevent Situ Meitang's story from being lost to history. Thank you for watching this video, hit the like and subscribe button, and stay tuned for who we cover next.